What's up guys, welcome back to the channel for another video. In today's video, we're going to talk about compressors and how to use them in your mix. Hey guys, it's Eli from EliMusicGroup.com, and be sure to check out the website for any and all of your music needs. A little while ago, I did a video on this channel talking about how I use compressors into my mixes, but today I thought I would make a video going into more details about compressors and show you guys exactly how you can use compressors in your mixes to achieve your desired sound. But first, what is a compressor? A compressor is a device that we use to control the dynamic range of a signal path. For example, vocals is a very dynamic instrument. Within the same verse, you can have a part that is so quiet that it is inaudible to having a part that is so loud that you cannot tolerate it, which is why we use compressors to control the dynamic range of a signal. That way the loud part will be tolerable while the quiet part is audible all at the same time. So how exactly do we use compressors? Before we get into that, if you're finding value in this video, make sure to drop a like and comment down below to show your support to this channel. And if you're new, don't forget to hit on the subscribe button and turn on the notification for more videos like this. And if you guys would like to help support the channel more, you can jump over to our website and get a t-shirt like this one. We would very much appreciate that. As well, I'm going to have my Amazon affiliate link down in the description. You can use that to buy equipment for your studio. And I'm going to have my Canva affiliate link as well, which you can use to help your social media posts stand out. So what exactly are the different type of compressors that we can run into when mixing? Well, for us in the digital world, there is really just one type of compressor that we're going to run into, and that is a digital compressor. But those compressors that we use in our DAW are modeled after a specific hardware counterpart. And more often than not, those digital compressors we're using looks and acts like the specific hardware that they were modeled after. So let's take a look at those different compressors that we are likely to run into when mixing. To start with, we have the VCA compressor. VCA stands for Voltage Controlled Amplifier. And one of the most common VCA compressors you're going to run into is the SSL compressor. With the VCA style compressor, it is more likely to have all the controls that you can find in a compressor. It is not always the case, but it is more likely to have every single setting that you can find in a compressor. All right, moving on from that, the next compressor we're going to talk about today is the FET compressor. A FET compressor uses what's called field effect transistors to apply compression to a signal path. And one of the most common FET compressors that you're going to run into is the 1176, arguably one of the most famous compressors in existence. The next compressor we're going to be talking about is the optical compressor. An optical compressor uses optical light to apply compression to a signal. One of the most famous optical compressors is the LA2A. And the last compressor we're going to be talking about is a Very-Mu compressor. The Very-Mu compressor uses a valve tube to apply compression to a signal. And one compressor I can think of off the top of my head is the Fairchild compressor. When using compressors, you need to understand exactly what the settings do. So let's talk about them. All right. So some of the most common settings you're going to find on any compressor is going to be as follow. At one, you have the threshold. The threshold basically tells the compressor when it needs to activate and start compressing. And at number two, we have the ratio. The ratio basically tells the compressor how much it's going to compress by. Okay. And following that, we have attack and release. As the name suggests, the attack tells the compressor how fast it's going to attack, and the release, how fast it's going to release the signal once it's been compressed. And after that, you're going to have the makeup gain. When compressing a signal, it's going to naturally get quieter. So you need to bring the volume back up to match the starting out volume to make sure that your compression is being applied correctly. In some cases, you're actually going to raise the volume while you're compressing, so you need to bring it back down so it matches the original signal, again, to make sure that your signal is being compressed correctly. While each different type of compressor may act differently, they all do the same thing. You just need to understand which compressor that you're using and how that compressor actually works. Other than that, they all do the exact same thing. They just do it in their own way. To help you understand compressors a bit more, I'm going to place most compressors that you might run into two different categories. Category one, we have the compressors that gives you access to the threshold, so you decide when that compressor starts acting, right? But remember that the threshold is not the only thing that's going to help the gain reduction. So you need to keep in mind that you have to play around with the other settings as well to get the desired sound, but you control when the compressor starts acting. On the other hand, we have compressors that has a fixed threshold. For those type of compressors, the threshold is fixed. It's not moving, so you have to bring the signal up to it to trigger the compression. For example, it's just gonna be a random number. We're gonna say our threshold for compressor A is gonna be fixed at minus 15 decibels. The peak for your signal might be well under that minus 15. So how do you get the compressor to activate? Essentially, you would bring up the signal to where the peaks will have to go past that minus 15 to activate the compressor. That is basically how most compressors work. Again, keep in mind that you have to play around with the other settings as well to get the desired sound, but overall, most compressors can fit in one of those two categories. Let's take a look at the different type of compressors that we have and see exactly how they work. So right now I have the Virtual Mix Rack by Slate Digital open, and it has most of the compressors that we talked about today open, and we're gonna take a look at exactly how they work and what's the difference between each compressor. All right, so starting with the left with the FG401, this one would be like a VCA type compressor. As you can see, it has a threshold, ratio, attack, release, makeup gain, and it has a mix knob. The mix knob you're not going to find on most compressors because this one allows you to do parallel compression all within the same plugin without having to reroute your signal. We're not even going to look at that today because we are talking about compression as a whole, not parallel compression, okay? So moving on to the next compressor we have is the FG2A, and that is Slate Digital's version of the LA2A, one of the optical compressors that we talked about. For this one, you can see it has peak reduction and it has a gain. This one only has two settings. With the peak reduction, it could be considered as your threshold, okay? Because this is what you'd be moving around to dictate the amount of gain reduction that you get from using this compressor, right? And the gain could be looked at as your makeup gain. The difference between the FG2A and FG401, or we can say the optical versus the VCA compressor, is with the optical compressor, the peak reduction is not exactly the same thing as the threshold. And the gain is not exactly like the makeup gain here. Though they are very similar, they act differently. You will see that once we start running some signal through them in just a minute. All right, moving on, we have the FG116, and this is Slate's version of the 1176. All right, and this one, you will notice that it has a gain, an output, attack release, and also ratio. You'll notice that it doesn't have a threshold like the VCA compressor does, and it doesn't have a makeup gain. It has instead input and output. The way this works is this would be one of those compressors that you would put under the fixed threshold, right? So the gain allows you to bring up the signal going into the compressor louder, right? And in order for the signal to actually hit the threshold, you have to bring it up louder, which by default will make your signal louder. So we would use the output to bring the signal back down so it can match the signal before it went into the compressor. And lastly, we have our very new compressor. Okay, this one again is a tube compressor. And as you can see for the settings on this one, it has an input, but it also has a threshold. Okay, the time constant would be your attack and release in this case. All right, and it has some more settings here. As you can see, this one can fit in both categories. It can fit in both the variable threshold. As you can see, you do have access to a threshold here. And it can also fit in the same category as a compressor that has the fixed threshold, because it has a gain input here where you can bring the signal into the compressor louder to trigger compression in this case. As a bonus, we're going to take a look at Slate Digital's custom opto. All right, so the FG2A is their version of the LE2A. So this one was modeled after the LE2A, while this custom opto is basically Slate Digital's version of an optical compressor. It is not the LE2A, it's just their version of an optical compressor. Okay? All right, so now let's go ahead and run a signal through all these compressors and see how we would use them. We're going to start with all compressors and bypass, and then we're going to add compressors in, and then I'm going to show you exactly what I did to get the desired sound that I wanted. All right, so this is the raw signal, no compression. All right, so you've just heard all these different compressors in action. Now let's take a look at what I did to achieve this sound I was looking for. All right, so starting with the VCA compressor, this one is one with the variable threshold, and I had brought the threshold down to about -20, right? And I have my threshold at 3 to 1. Okay, and for the attack, I had it at about 3, and for the release, I had it at about 4. So relatively fast attack and relatively slow release. And the makeup gain I had at about plus 2.75 decibels. All right, so that's what I did on the VCA compressor to get the sound that I want. Keep in mind that I wanted the compressed sound to match the levels of the uncompressed sound at the end. The only thing I wanted to be different is, to start with, the raw track had some peaks and some very quiet moments. I wanted everything to be audible at roughly about the same level, right? I didn't want the peaks to be too loud and the quiet parts to be too quiet. So I controlled the dynamic range to bring them a little bit closer together. Before we move on to the next one thing I wanted to point out. When compressing a signal, there's 3 different points that you need to look at in terms of the actual volume for that signal, right? First point is the peak. What is the loudest peak for signal? And next is the quietest part. Outside of those 2 points, you need to take a look at what's the average level for that signal, right? Because the average level for that signal, that's about where you're gonna want your peak to come down to, and also where you're gonna want your quiet parts to come up to. Okay, that's how we control the dynamic range of a signal. But we're not trying to kill the dynamic range, we're just trying to control it, right? Which means you're not actually going to bring your peaks all the way down to where your average level is. And you're also not going to bring your quiet parts all the way up to where the average level is. You just want them to be closer to those. It's kind of like a compromise, right? So the goal at the end is to have the peaks to be tolerable while the quiet parts are audible all at the same time. Moving on to the next part is the optical compressor. In this case, I had the peak reduction at about 20, right? And the gain, I had brought it back down actually to about 26, to about 26.3, right? So that's what gave me the desired outcome that I was looking for, and also keeping the levels roughly about the same as before the signal was compressed, right? And moving on to the fed compressor. In this case, this is the compressor with a fixed threshold, remember? So this time I had to bring up the signal, right? So I had to bring the signal up to about minus 26.2 decibels, where I had to bring the output down to about minus 16 decibels, right? And for the attack, I had it at about 4.7, and the release I had at super fast. Again, that's what was giving me the desired outcome that I was looking for this specific signal. So that's what I ended up going with. And moving on to the Fairchild compressor. For the input, I have it at about 10. And for the threshold, I have it at about, looks like 4.9-ish. And for the time constant, which would be the release in this case, I have it at its fastest. And as a bonus, I have the custom opto by Sleep Digital, which I have the peak reduction at about 20, ratio at about 3:1, and the output is at about 30. Noticing that the settings for all these compressors is not exactly the same. While some are similar, but they are not exactly the same. The reason for that is because each of those compressors are different, so they act differently. The settings that I went with didn't really matter. The desired outcome, that's all that mattered, right? As long as I got the desired outcome that I was going for, that's all that mattered. Knowing what setting to put in your compressor to get a desired sound is not going to help you with getting that desired sound, right? So you need to learn exactly what compressor you have, how to use it, and most importantly, you need to learn how to hear the compressor, because it's very easy to overcompress or to undercompress. Though undercompressing may not hurt your sound as much, but overcompressing will definitely kill the sound. So learn how to hear the compressor, and that is what's going to help you get the desired sound that you're looking for. Regardless of what type of compressor you're using, it can get the sound that you want. But if you don't know how to hear that compressor, then you will not be able to use it. That's it for this video. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure to drop a like and comment down below to show your support. And if you're new, don't forget to hit on the subscribe button and turn on the notification for more videos like this. I'll see you guys next time in the next video.